Give me a child for the first 7 years and you may do what you like with him afterwards, or her. Your children are your greatest investment. And I think what we all want for our children is to create as perfect an environment as we possibly can for them. But modern society certainly isn't doing that. We now have an epidemic in childhood of things like obesity. We've never seen obesity rates like we're seeing these days. We're now getting even 10-year-old children getting non-insulin dependent diabetes. Not the typical diabetes of childhood, the non-insulin dependent later onset diabetes. And this is because of what we're doing in modern society. And children are living in a different environment than what we grew up in. Children's nutrition is completely different to the sort of foods we ate as children. Their entertainment is completely different to the sort of entertainment. I remember as a child, I used to have this wonderful fantasy world where I go out in the backyard, kick a ball all the time. I used to play for Australia. I used to play cricket for Australia as well. I'd be hitting a bat up Bradman-esque against the wall, not as good as Bradman, of course, which is probably obvious. But children don't do that these days. When we were kids, we'd be on our bikes driving around the neighbourhood. But we won't let our kids walk around the neighbourhood because of these monsters out there who are doing things that we don't want to imagine could possibly happen to our children. So life has changed dramatically. And unfortunately, all of these changes, the changes in entertainment, in education, in nutrition, are having dramatic effects on our children's health. And what I want to do this evening is talk to you a bit about how I think we can impact on that and the things that are happening in the last 10, 15, 20 years that are really having profound effects on our children and therefore obviously on our lives as well, because I don't know what you people are like, but you know how many children I have. 5, everything's in 5. And so my wife and I certainly agonise over what we do with our kids, as I'm sure you do over yours. But let's talk a bit about sort of interesting concepts around this. And firstly, let's talk about genes. Because a lot of people don't understand what genes really are. And if you think of something that's genetic, you think that's something you pass on. But I want to explain to you a bit. I've already mentioned the sympathetic nervous system, this fear, flight, fight system. Now let me say, as far as that and genes go, that if I switch on your fear, flight, fight system on a chronic basis, so I put you under stress for a few months, I switch on the genes that dictate how much your fear, flight, fight system works. You see, every single person in this room has the gene for everything. Only in most people, if it's a bad gene, it's only a very, very small gene, so it takes a hell of a lot to cause a problem. For example, let's talk about lung cancer. Now, we all know that the greatest association with lung cancer is cigarette smoking. But only 20% of cigarette smokers get lung cancer. Why is that? Because their genes directing them towards lung cancer are much stronger than in the other 80% of smokers who don't get cancer. So if you have that gene and you don't smoke, your risk for lung cancer is incredibly small. But if you have that gene and you do smoke, the free radicals in the cigarette switch on that gene and make it really promote lung cancer. In the same way, again, we have the conservative members of the profession telling us that stress does not cause disease, because they've done studies, double-blind controlled studies, to show that stress is not causing a problem. Now that is stupidity to the nth degree. Why? Because you can't measure stress like you measure cholesterol. You can't do a stress blood test to say this person is much more stressed than someone else. There are people that get stressed and their reaction to stress is to start throwing things at other people or punching other people. But there are other people that get stressed who just sit there and bottle it all up inside. There are other people that have absolutely no insight into their stress response. And if you get them to fill out one of these stress questionnaires to see how much the stress is impacting on them, they'll lie like a pig in mud because they don't understand what the stress is doing to them. So one man's stress is another man's delight. Racing car drivers, if they weren't working at a very high adrenaline level, would crash around every bend. They enjoy that stress. Some people love that sort of stuff. Other people hate it. I know people that have a fear of public speaking. I have a fear of not public speaking. That's my greatest fear, is not being asked. So when you put people under stress, you flick on a set of genes that are the stress genes. And then if I take that person with me on Thursday to Tahiti and we sit on the cruise for a week and measure those stress genes, they've basically started to wear off. Once you start flicking on genes, they last for 5 or 6 weeks, in fact, because the genes then set a series of proteins in action which hang around for about 5 or 6 weeks and then they wear off. And that happens the second someone is exposed to this society, and which is a point I'm going to be making very, very soon. So the gene-environment interaction is vital for the generation of all these problems, and it starts very early in your life. It doesn't start when you are 50. Heart disease does not start when you're 45, 50, 60 years old. It starts the second your mother starts putting garbage in your mouth like baby food. That's when it starts. And it builds up slowly over decades to become an established fatty plaque in the wall of your arteries, not causing a blockage. Think of a donut. Blood goes through the hole in the donut or the wall of the arteries where all the action happens for decades before it actually ruptures to cause a blockage. So it's starting early on in life. We've got to start thinking early with our children. And we've got to look at our modern day diets. Now you hear me talk about synthetic fats, these horrible processed packaged fats that are ubiquitous through all these food that can sit on your pantry shelf for 3 to 6 months with a use-by date. The diets of most children and teenagers these days are 10 to 20% sugar and 10 to 20% synthetic fat. So 40% of their diet is absolute garbage. Absolute garbage. And we've really got to look at that. We've really got to look at it. I'll be talking a little bit later on about the ways that's really worrying me in terms of how it's affecting children. And then there are things like televisions and computers. Now these kids now these days, I mean, I don't know about you, but I just grew up in an age that was always a bit beyond the computer. So I always missed out on being these computer geeks where you can sit there and fiddle with them, and I really struggle. I know how to turn the thing. A mate of mine called Gary Egger, who started Gutbusters in Australia, he says, yeah, diets are important, exercise is important, but the most important thing is movement. And kids aren't moving like we used to move. Their entertainment shifted from the kicking the ball around in the back and hitting a cricket ball and throwing the netball. It shifted to this sitting in front of a television for hours, or sitting in front of a computer doing these stupid computer games and this stupid chat on the computer. And it's dreadful because we're hijacking their health. We are hijacking their health by this sort of behaviour. And the 10 to 20% sugar and 10 to 20% synthetic fat is horrendous. You only need about 2 to 5% of your daily intake in synthetic fat to start causing all of these health problems we're seeing. And they're getting 10 to 20%. Now, we've also got to look at disease occurring in kids. Not, and this is one of the, as you might have gathered, I have a bit of a thing against cigarettes. I don't know if you've seen that, but I do. I have an incredible thing against cigarettes. And when I see young women smoking, I think it's just one of the most, I mean, when I see anyone smoking, I think it's disgusting. But when I see a young woman smoking, I think to myself, that person is a potential carrier of a child. And they might find out at 8 weeks that they're pregnant and make a decision then to not smoke. 20% of women who are pregnant still smoke, which I think is horrendous. But what really disappoints me is you want to create a perfect environment for your child. You cannot allow that child to be born into the toxic environment of cigarette smoke. It's just a disgrace. It is an absolute disgrace. But I wouldn't even see it as just picking on smoking or smokers. Think about people who go to particular takeaway food outlets and who are eating this sort of garbage and allowing a child to be born into this environment. People who are getting themselves blind, rotten drunk on weekends and allowing a child to be born into this environment. I mean, there are so many things we do to our bodies every day, and that's our business. It's your body. You can really do to your own body what you like. But my goodness, I don't know about you guys, but I just don't think you've got a right to do that to a small embryo that hasn't even got the chance to make a decision about what they want in their life. And people are out there allowing children to be born into toxic environments. Now, do I have any evidence for what I'm saying that it's a bad thing? Oh yeah, I sure do. And there's no doubt that the children of smokers, even smokers who give up at the 8-week time, have low birth weight babies. Well, is that a problem if your child's born low birth weight? Well, let me tell you about that. There was a study from a place called Hertfordshire in England. It's been going for about 50, 60 years, and they showed that one of 3 factors had a major impact on future risk for heart disease. Number 1, low birth weight babies. Number 2, babies that didn't double their birth weight in 12 months. Didn't double their birth weight in 12 months. So it's these little fat babies you see are actually good for their early development. So a baby that didn't do that, not good. And the third thing, which you might find a little bit surprising, in this particular study was the babies who were breastfed beyond 12 months. Now, why is that? Because often the mother's using the breastfeeding as a replacement for introducing nutrition, proper nutrition into the child. And so it's great to breastfeed your children. It's like mother's milk. You can't criticise breastfeeding. It's just magnificent stuff. It is mother's milk. You cannot criticise it. But again, there's the balance. You can't go overboard with it either. So these people that were low birth weight, didn't double their birth weight after 12 months, or were breastfed beyond 12 months, had much more heart disease as they became adults. Now, why is that? The reason for that is that they were malnourished. They were malnourished from the moment of conception to then, in their 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and they start getting introduced to food, to all the stuff in modern society that's poisoned, that I've spoken about before, and I will speak a bit more about later. So you're now bombarding these poorly developed arteries with garbage, and those poorly developed arteries cannot cope with that garbage. And so I told you the disease starts very early on in life, and instead of being on that curve, these kids are on this curve. And we're doing this to children, and we're not even thinking about it. I'm sure people in this room aren't, but I'm saying we as a collective society are doing this to children, and I think that's a disgrace. I really think that's a disgrace. Then we've got specific conditions that are affecting children now. And there's a thing called ADD. I want to give you my bent on ADD. Now again, you might be surprised that this is a bit different from the mainstream opinion. But I think there are 3 main causes. There should be 5, but there's only 3 main causes for ADD. And number 1 is a thing called nutrition. If you're going to bombard a growing brain with synthetic fat and processed carbohydrates, what do you expect that brain's going to do? Now, I put it to you like this. How many times have your kids gone off to a party when they're not used to eating all this garbage, and they come back after carbohydrate city, like simple carbohydrate city and synthetic fat city, after this, and those kids are wired. You can't slow them down. They've been wired acutely by all the garbage that they've eaten at these parties. And my family's no better. I'm not, I'm standing here saying this stuff, but it worries me the way my kids eat sometimes, I can tell you. But what I'm saying to you is that this nutrition, this garbage we're filling our kids' faces with, this 10 to 20% sugar, the 10 to 20% synthetic fats, the brain doesn't like it. And that wires these kids. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is a very interesting concept, and it's what I mentioned before, it's the entertainment these children are having. See, when we were kids, our entertainment, as I said, I'm in the backyard hitting a ball up against the wall for hours on end. We'd focus on something. You'd learn to play the piano. You'd have to sit there for hours playing the piano. You'd learn to focus. You'd read a book. You probably don't realise this, but now in television shows, and there's only one television show I watch, and that's 11 Men Struggle Against Another 11 Men, cricket, but these television shows have to have the plot up and running within the first minute or so, because they know they're going to lose the kids. Because people want that. They want the instant answers. They can't allow you to focus into something. If you read a book and you haven't got the plot in the first minute or two, well, forget it. You throw the book away. It's too boring. They don't want focus. They want this constant stimulation. And I think it's the constant stimulation of excessive computers and press button, tell you 50 different stations, they're all garbage, but you can go surfing through the whole thing. Children want that these days, and they want to be stimulated and entertained, and I don't think it's good for their brain development. I think focus is a wonderful thing for brain development. That's why meditation is so good, because you focus. And children are not learning to focus. Number 2 reason for ADD. Number 3 is a fascinating one. About 20 years ago, a study was done where they took children and put children into a room at a desk, and they said to the children, there's a marshmallow on that desk, and you can have that marshmallow right now if you want, but I've got to go outside. Now, if you can wait till I come back, you can have 2 marshmallows. And then they did this, and they looked at the kids who had to have the marshmallow straight away, or the kids who could wait for the second marshmallow. And then they followed those kids for a 15-year period, which showed enormous delayed gratification. And then they found something really interesting. The children that had to have that marshmallow straight away were the ones that had much higher crime rates, much higher drug and alcohol addiction, much worse scores on their final exams at high school, and much more difficulty in forming proper, long-lasting relationships with people. Why is that? Because they weren't taught from an early age a thing called self-discipline. We have in this society now a situation where discipline's gone out the window. Kids aren't being disciplined. You can't give a kid a little slap across the back of the legs anymore. You can't do you can't speak loud to them. You might traumatize them. What garbage. If you don't discipline children, you're not giving them focus. And you're allowing them to run riot. You know, bratty kids come from bad parents. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So I think there's 3 major reasons there. There's nutrition, there's lack of focus, and there's lack of discipline. And I think that is my bent on ADD. It could be completely wrong. I'm just giving you my opinion. You can take with it what you like. And I think that's one thing we need to be thinking about. But then we've got this rampant obesity, diabetes, and whatever. And that's coming from, again, nutrition, lack of exercise, lack of discipline. I want it and I want it now. I've got to have something to eat. I've got to have this piece of garbage there. I need that. So I think we've got to start thinking differently about how we're behaving in this society, because I think it's an absolute disgrace. So what I'd like to do in the next section is talk really about nutrition and supplementation for children.